Okay. All right, I just want to quickly start off by welcoming everybody to day 2. And before I start, I'd like to also just take a moment to thank my esteemed colleagues on the organizing committee and the amazing moderators, panelists, keynote speakers, and everyone else involved in the organization of this conference. I think everybody would agree that day 1 was fantastic, and I'm pretty sure day 2 will be just as good. Okay. I do not accept the version that we should encourage their return. We should prevent their return. We must settle Jaffa. Jaffa will become a Jewish city. We must prevent at all costs their return. Is what David Ben-Gurion, founder and the first prime minister of Israel, proclaimed after the establishment of the Israeli state on Palestinian land in May 1948. Israel was in fact born after a deliberate Zionist campaign to clear the area of its native inhabitants, resulted in the expulsion of approximately 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and land that they had nurtured, farmed, and lived on for hundreds of years. The aforementioned events are now known by Palestinians the world over as the Nakba, or catastrophe of 1948. And for them, Ben-Gurion's words carry a tragic meaning. My grandparents personally experienced the suffering caused by the Nakba as they hail from Yazur, a village that was located about 4 miles east of the ancient coastal city of Jaffa, now part of Tel Aviv. Yazur was one of the many villages that were systematically depopulated of their native Palestinian inhabitants during the Zionist forces' onslaught on the area in 1947 and 1948. My grandfather had owned and farmed several plots of land in his village and traded citrus fruits. Since Palestine at the time was a predominantly agrarian society, the loss of land entailed more than a loss of territory for him, but also a weakened sense of identity, legacy, and pride. My grandparents were forced to flee Yazur and sought refuge first in the relatively calmer town of Hebron, or Al-Khalil. They were initially under the impression that they would return after a short period of 2 or 3 weeks, but later learned that after the establishment of the State of Israel, Palestinian refugees were denied the right to return to their homes. My grandparents eventually settled in Jericho, a town with a warm climate similar to that of the coast, and like Yazur, famous for its citrus fruits. My grandfather and his family returned only one time to Yazur after the 1967 Six-Day War, during which Israel completed its conquest of historic Palestine by occupying the West Bank and Gaza Strip. They were, however, only able to travel there as visitors or tourists, as all claims to their land and property were not recognized by the Israeli authorities. They found that their homes had been destroyed and replaced by new structures owned by Israelis. My grandfather fell ill after this trip due to the sorrow and disappointment experienced by witnessing the state of his village. Despite their longing for a return, the restrictions on even visiting their home increased immensely after the First and Second Intifada, and both my grandparents passed away in Jericho, never to have lived in Yazur again. For my grandparents, Ben-Gurion's utterance rang true. Their generation of refugees never returned, and Jaffa and Yazur became a part of Israel. Yet Palestinian steadfastness and attachment to the land from which they were expelled was never conquered, despite deliberate Israeli efforts to extinguish them. Millions of Palestinians in increasing numbers across the world commemorate the Nakba every year on the anniversary of the State of Israel's founding and hold dearly the right of return. Yazur and every other village that was depopulated or demolished is remembered and celebrated. The campaign of ethnic cleansing that accompanied Israel's founding made more than half of the total Palestinian population refugees, and the right of return thus materialized into an integral and inseparable component of the struggle for liberation and equality. In fact, until justice is achieved, the right of return is a central and unshakable component of contemporary Palestinian identity. This inalienable right will thus never be forgotten, despite repeated attempts on the part of Israel to obstruct its implementation and prevent its discussion by promoting falsehoods about the origins of the refugee issue. The right of return, however, requires a transition from imagination and remembrance, which has generally characterized the discourse so far, towards action. With growing recognition and awareness of the injustices perpetrated against Palestinians, the academic and institutional conversation and examination of the right must begin to move beyond pointing out the numerous legal and moral justifications for the return and instead build plans for practical implementation. Despite claims to the contrary, and as you saw yesterday, and you'll see more of this today, there are no insurmountable obstacles, demographic, cultural, or spatial, to materializing a return. This point must be highlighted and used against views that only concentrate or focus on the obstacles. For this reason, I have joined a group of Boston area students to organize the Right of Return conference, which we hope is providing a platform for these ideas. The goal is to expand the discourse relating to the Palestinian plight for justice by incorporating the practical methods and implications of return, by bringing together leading voices from across the Palestinian diaspora, as well as numerous academics and activists who are instrumental in the global movement for Palestinian rights. We hope we are spurring new ideas and creating a space to develop the mechanics of the right of return's implementation. We hope the conference's output will be an important step in the creation and development of a new narrative that can be used to overcome the political obstacles to Palestinian return, restitution, justice, and liberation. Thank you.